I am, as I told you before, I am super excited to have you on because data ethics is I think, a very, very interesting and diverse topic. So I will admit, though, when I first saw your title of Global AI Ethicist, I said, that's the first time I've ever heard of that title ever. So could you give some background on what the title and sort of the responsibilities are for that role?
Mhm. Absolutely. So, the kind of the global AI ethicist is, thinking about, because when we are applying AI, sometimes it's local, but sometimes what we use can kind of go beyond, let's say, just US. You could apply it in Europe, you can apply it in Asia. So there is also a global aspect of it. And thinking about the impact of having that AI system at a global scale. One aspect of it, when it comes to the global side of it, is also around environmental impact of it. So at different locations, different geographics, the impact would be different. So that would be the global element of it.
Got you. And so that's the global side of it. What is the primary role of an AI ethicist? Because I'm not sure if everyone has even heard the term. I think we can guess, but just out of your experience, what that is.
Mhm. So we definitely have heard the term ethics. And recently, you see a lot of use cases and a lot of interest in the area of AI and artificial intelligence. So, one of the area of concern, and you see that more often coming up, is the ethical concerns when it comes to AI. So, as AI ethicists, the main focus is to evaluate that AI system with regards to ethical framework that you have. Depending on the organization, depending on the use case, you may think about a certain framework as kind of ethics and values that the organizations have. How you would apply it in an applicable, kind of applied way to the AI system that you're trying to build. So that would be the role of AI ethicists, reviewing the process.
So you're reviewing the process to ensure um, that it's not only ethical but also fair uh, based on the data and the practices of the practical use in the exact use case. Correct?
Yeah, so I can kind of give you. So what I mentioned was AI ethicists in general. So I can kind of give you more details on what we do and my role is at DataRobot, because I'm sure in different organizations, AI ethicists might have different responsibilities. So I can kind of divide the responsibility that I have in three areas. First of all, is around education and kind of thought leadership aspect of it, bringing the attention towards the responsible use of AI. What kind of information we can put out there that's not too abstract that industries, data scientists cannot really connect them to the use case that they have, but rather in an applied way that they can read through that content and kind of be able to relate it to the work that they're doing and be able to apply the points that we are making in the work that they do. The second part of it is my engagement with our clients. So that's whether they're clients, whether they're prospects, they might be interested, let's say, in a specific case. Sometimes it's around bias and fairness specifically. Sometimes it's more general, ethics in AI, kind of responsible AI topic. Then that would be my engagement with them, having this exchange of knowledge, best practices that we see in the industry. And the last piece of it is actually bringing that into our product.
Mm.
So, not only just thinking about it and talking about it, but also applying it in the product that we have. how we can kind of bring that trust in the product that we have, whether if it's, having bias and fairness feature in place, putting extra guardrails. So when our users are using the platform, they can use it with knowing that, I have evaluations. If I have a concern around bias, I have tests that I can run. I have insights that I can look into and evaluate the process.
Okay. That's so interesting, because I think the thing that really interests me about data ethics is that as we move forward into the future, data is just being compiled. And I kind of joked with one of our previous guests that it's not like a hard drive where, like, if you get to like a terabyte of space and you need to add something to it, you got to delete it. It's like that information is never ending. And that information sometimes has biases in the way that it was actually garnered, like some of the historical data around, especially around race. And I even think of, just because it kind of hits near to me, police and race relations in certain communities. And through the process of a data ethicist, you're essentially going back into that data and ensuring that there's no biasness in that information, so that future output from the AI isn't biased.
Yes. So, when you're thinking about data ethics, there are a few elements to it. As you mentioned, evaluating the data to see if we see any bias happening there. And, with that, how would you define fairness? And, because that's the first step.
Right.
What fair means for us in this case. And based on that, then we would be able to evaluate our data and see if we find any presence of bias in the data. The second area that you can think of when you're thinking about the ethics is how this data is going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more connected to, bringing that data in for AI use, but how we are using this data, why we are using it, that could also create, later on in the process, kind of concerns around ethics.
Mm. Question: is it difficult to discern what is fair? Because I'm sure, and this gets into really, and this is why I like this topic so much. It gets into like this psychological question of what is fairness, and I guess it depends on each use case. But have you run into those issues a lot of like determining from like the first step what does fair actually mean in this context?
Oh, absolutely. In pretty much every kind of engagement that we have with our clients, especially if they're interested in bias and fairness, the first question is that what fair means to you, what fair means in the context that you're thinking about. And it is a complex topic. Yeah. Depending on, we all have different perspectives. And as you know, there are so many different definitions of fairness out there. So how would you apply it to the use case? And sometimes you need to think about the regulations. For example, in hiring, you have regulations that specifically defines what fair means in the context of hiring. But in other areas, you may not have that regulations that would clarify it for you or make it easy for you to kind of think about fairness. So you have to think about what are the kind of who gets the favorable outcome and what favorable outcome in that context means. And based on that, then thinking about what would be the effect of each of those fairness metrics that I'm thinking about. How would they look like in my use case? And based on that, decide whether if, one would be better than the others or more appropriate. Another thing that, adds to the complexity is sometimes it's really hard to pick only one. And If you're not sure, you may evaluate your system for multiple metrics, and in one of them you're fair, but in the other ones you're not fair. And that kind of, when you're still not sure what is appropriate, now that creates another level of kind of confusion and complexity to it. That, okay, why I'm fair in one and why I'm not fair in the other. It's not intuitive, but that happens depending on the definitions that you're using. So, when we have these engagements, we try to help and kind of guide our clients to have an understanding about how to approach just defining fairness and kind of thinking about it in the context of use case and what would be the result of that. And based on the values that they have, the regulations, then they can kind of pick the one that's more appropriate for them.
Wow. That sounds so complex, or at least has the potential to get really, really complex. Is that the most difficult part, you would say, of your role, having to have those kind of conversations and having like the opinions of not only your clients, but maybe even people on your team, and then having that kind of back and forth?
Absolutely. And, when you're thinking about defining fairness, right? Sometimes people think that, oh, that's a data scientist role. They would kind of evaluate the system. But what we are trying to do is, kind of bringing that to the point that it's not only data scientists who has to figure out what fair means. People from compliance team, from management team, everybody should be on the table. All the stakeholders should be in the room and discuss what fair means for the use case that they have. So one of the challenges that we have, the data scientists, they're technical. They understand if you put a kind of equation in front of them, they understand it. But if you're bringing someone from compliance, executives who may not be technical, talking about false positives, false negatives could already kind of, for them, would be overwhelming. Right. So how would you bring that into a conversation without making that conversation too complicated that they would disengage? So, the challenging part is to have that conversation in a language that everybody understands, because their inputs, from the compliance, from executives, from the team that might be using this system, for each of these kind of personas have their own perspective of what fair means. So and we need to bring their ideas on the table. They need to understand it, and that the most challenging part is to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Everyone understand what's the consequence of using one fairness metric versus the other, and even a step back, what if whether everyone understands what that fairness metric means.
I didn't even think about like all the different sides of fairness. What's fair to one group of people, or like what's fair to compliance might not be fair to like the data science. Yeah, that is an incredibly complex position to be in, and it's super, super interesting. How did you get involved in data ethics? Like, was that something that you were always passionate about, or was it, or did you just stumble upon it? Like, what's your background and how did you get involved with this?
So obviously the area of, especially area of AI bias is fairly new. 10 years ago, you barely heard about, thinking about AI bias and even trying to mitigate it. But recently, you see a lot of articles coming from academia in this area, which is very good. I'm quite encouraged about that. Mm-hmm. But my journey started, a few years back when I was working on a use case that was kind of relevant to HR. And when I was working on it, I noticed that, that we need to have certain conversations around, what it means in the context of hiring when we are asking certain questions. because those questions might be, from the perspective of a person who never thought about bias, could be relevant questions. But, when you're bringing the kind of the bias into the equation, you may need to rethink the type of questions that you're asking. So as part of that, process, I got involved in AI bias, thinking about mitigations. And one of the first steps that we took is try to have that educational element of it, kind of helping the stakeholders understand, on the use case that they're thinking about, especially in case of HR, which is a high-risk use case with a high impact. What kind of questions should be asked? What kind of questions should be rethink, and maybe changing the question that we are trying to answer? And that's how I got involved. And when I joined DataRobot, one of the things that we are trying to do, to offer a platform that's not only for data scientists, but for people who we call citizen data scientists, people who may not be as data science expert, but they want to experiment with their data and understand what kind of insights they can get from it. So one of the things that you see, especially when there's a headline about AI gone wrong, is actually an expert data scientist was working on it. Everyone makes mistakes. But now imagine we are having this platform and we are saying that we are trying to put all these guardrails for someone who's not an expert to use this system. And that's how I also started the process of working in DataRobot to bring the trust element of it with regards to bias and fairness. So what kind of feature and tool we should have in our product that could address the concerns around bias in the models that they're building in our platform. And that's kind of the journey that I took from, the experience that I had from my previous job, and kind of bringing it to DataRobot and putting it in the product that we have.
Nice. Thank you for that. As you were talking, I thought of like movies that I've watched. I'm not movies, documentaries that I've watched that have detailed some of the bias in AI and machine learning. And one of the things that has like historically come up for me in my mind is intention. And in your experience, as you were sort of learning about the biasness in AI and learning about the companies that were involved in it, and you started helping certain companies and clients, where do you think the intention lies with companies? And maybe this is a question of like how things kind of started, because I guess with machine learning and AI, it kind of starts with, listen, this is the only information we have. We're just going to go with it. And then someone calls them out about the biasness of that technology. Do you think that there was an intention to not be considerate of everyone that's affected by this, and it was like there's a particular agenda with some organizations? Or does it feel more like this was kind of like the natural cause of events, like they swing too far in one direction, and then society and academia and organizations like DataRobot help pull them sort of back to the middle and help regulate it?
So I would say, in my experience, there is no kind of specific intention involved in it, but rather it's either lack of knowledge and kind of not having a diverse perspective. Because I have my background, so I have, my experience. I might be blind to, other people's experiences. So without that knowledge, I might be building something, and because I didn't consider it, because I never experienced their kind of their life experience and their perspective, I I wasn't I might have not known about that. So it's kind of, for me, when I see them, mostly it's around just a lack of knowledge and lack of perspective. And that's why it's important when you're thinking about building these systems, a diverse team, and bringing all the stakeholders in the table. That's the most important part of it. And a lot of things that you've seen that made headlines. Again, not necessarily there is a specific intention in it, but rather that lack of perspective and that lack of knowledge and experience that people who are building it have. And that can cause the type of biases that they might see in the system. But fortunately, at least in recent years, there's, in my experience and my engagement with the clients, you see a lot of effort in terms of understanding and understanding the impacts of that system on different groups and trying to mitigate that in their process.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clarifying that. Because as soon as you said it, it just like, it actually turned a light bulb on in my head, because I think that's an area, even like societal wise, like you see someone say something maybe insensitive, but it's because they didn't quite understand maybe the customs of the area that they're in. And I think, just to put this out there, like that's one of the things that is so great about Flatiron School, is that we kind of cultivate this diverse group. And it's actually not even on, I don't want to say it's not on purpose, but like when everyone's a career changer, everyone's coming from all these different diverse backgrounds. So you kind of get this melting pot of talent. But I wanted to ask you about, and this is a particular pet peeve of mine and kind of where my data ethics, like going down a YouTube rabbit hole, came from. It is, one day in the height of COVID, the first wave, there was an article, and I won't put the publication out there, but a very, very reputable platform put out this statistic that said something like 35% of people in America still don't believe that COVID is real. And there was a link to the data set. So I clicked on the link and went through the data set, and it only polled 1,000 people. Now, I'm not a data scientist or a statistician, but I'm willing to bet that 1,000 people isn't enough of a sample size to really get an idea of the mentality, mindset, or any kind of real empirical evidence of how America is feeling about something. So I'm curious, like when you see things like that, and I'm sure you see, like, it frustrates me a lot when I see stuff like that, because they're giving you sort of like this bite-sized information for you to go on and tell somebody else, and it just kind of like the lie travels around the world while the truth is putting its shoes on. And I'm curious, like, do you feel optimistic even in light of things like that being proliferated through mainstream media as a data ethicist?
So it definitely, things like that sometimes can be frustrating. And, when we have these type of conversations, for me, the first thing is like, you always need to have that asterisk there. We are saying this, but be cautious that it was this sample size, this whole laundry list of everything that you can think of that was wrong with the data. And it's, even in any AI use case that you're trying to use the data for, always have that laundry list with you, that I have this data, but I know XYZ that are concerns with this data. thinking about, is this data really represents the population that I'm going to, in the case of you, is this data represents American population, or it represents just a certain demographics or a certain group of people there. So that's very important that, when we are thinking about the data, whether if it's just, running a survey and generalizing from it, or actually doing an AI work, is to, have a good understanding of where this data stands. And can we actually use this data to make a general statement, or use this data to build a system, like an AI system, and assume that we can apply it on the population that we were hoping that this AI is going to be used for. So for me, that's kind of, the first step. Every time that I hear something, it's like, is your data really represents the overall population?
That's exactly it. And one of the things that I thought of as well is like it with innovation feeling like it's actually speeding up. I'm wondering from your perspective if the AI ethics can keep up with that speed, because I think of like I was watching a documentary on self-driving trucks for packages, essentially eliminating the need of like a physical driver. Maybe there's someone like controlling it from the remote. Like we already have self-driving cars in the works, and at some point will be mainstream. I'm wondering if ethics, the AI ethics, is actually can keep up with the size of the innovation that's coming out, especially moving into 2022 and beyond.
So there are kind of, when you're thinking about AI ethics, there is a foundation, and that foundation would kind of stay the same. It's just that the additional principles that you put in place, we definitely need to keep up with the innovations. Something that we have right now, our level of imagination is just what we can experience right now. Right. 30 years from now, things might have drastically changed. So definitely, what we have here and now as AI ethics probably won't be applicable 30 years from now. Would be bare minimum, regardless of how advanced our AI ethics is right now.
Yeah.
So it's definitely very important to keep up. And that's one of the things that, at any company, if you're thinking about having that kind of AI ethics element of it, it definitely needs to be a dynamic process. It needs to evolve constantly. You always have new use cases that are coming in, and each use case is unique in its own way. So we always need to have that in mind and always try to adapt to the new technology that's coming in.
That's interesting you say that then, because if we do the work kind of now, setting a great foundation, everything that's sort of built on top of it will have those sort of ethics built in, and it's just to continue to iterate on it as the technology changes then. Huh.
Absolutely. So for example, thinking about data ethics element of it. So you have that foundation of, where the data is coming from, having that thorough process of evaluating the source of the data, how the data is collected, whether the data is representative. And, maybe 50 years from now, the population would change. So we need to update that aspect of it. Or we may have a new perspective that we haven't considered yet right now. So if those elements needs to be, we need to always think about them and always improve the system that we have. But definitely, we need to think about having that foundation there that we can build on.
Man, This is so cool. This is just, man, this stuff is just so interesting to me. Uh, I was watching one of your talks. You gave it on, it was on Facebook, and you were talking about, well, I have it here, the three decision types of artificial intelligence, and decision one being the lowest stakes of the three. And an example would be like a predictive model that can predict how well like a banner ad will do. And then like decision two is how well no, I'm sorry. It was a mortgage, right? Like how probable is somebody to get this mortgage, and should they be rejected for it or approved for it? Which is decision two would be the higher stakes, but not life or death, something that affects people um, pretty drastically, and that should have consider continuously iterate and improve on that model because it affects lives so much. And then the third decision being the highest stakes one, that is the most risk money wise and health wise, and that is a AI that predicts based on imaging of someone's body whether something's wrong or not, and that the final call should be on the doctor or whoever the human is to make that final decision. And as I was listening to that, this thought came in my mind as I talk about like self-driving cars and trucks, and then Amazon dropping your package off with a drone and things like that. And as I think about those decisions, I'm wondering if we're inching closer and closer to AI making decisions for us. Because I don't know, I can easily see a situation where, or a time rather, where maybe with the decision three of artificial intelligence, that the doctors are making the final decision, and then maybe there's a situation where the AI gets fine tuned to the point where maybe it's hitting like 99.8% accuracy, and then it's in direct conflict with what maybe the doctor is seeing and thinking. And then you go with the doctor and something goes wrong. All of a sudden are we better off using the AI versus the human? Is this a dark way of thinking of things, or does that feel like a genuine reality that we could experience?
Oh no, and when we're thinking about it, especially in the high risk ones, one of the elements is, in the scenario that you mentioned, we should also think about that us as humans, we are never perfect. And AI is just learning from us. So assuming that AI is going to be perfect is also completely wrong. So how we manage that risk? In this case, the AI getting the diagnosis wrong, that can have a huge implication that someone would be denied the access to be enrolled into a treatment program. And that could have a kind of a life and death situation for them.
Mm-hmm.
So in those situations, both AI and the physician could get things wrong. But one way that you can think of building that process is, helping using the AI and what AI learned, because you can, make it such that AI would explain to you why it's making a decision that it's making. So those insights could be very helpful to a physician. Why AI thinks the patient needs to be enrolled into a program. Those insights, the physician could look at the image, they may not find anything, or what they see may not be kind of risky enough for them to enroll a patient into a program. But if they look at the insights from the AI, they might find something that, from their reviewing the image, they may have not seen, or a combination of different things that may have not come across their way, and having their expertise and what AI is giving them as an insight, combination of these two could improve the process. But of course, sometimes the physician gets it wrong, sometimes AI gets it wrong. So that's also part of the process of, what are the risks of that? And in addition to it, another element of it is, again, that continuous learning process of it. So always trying to improve the AI system as well.
I completely, I thank you for providing some context there, because as you said that, I thought of like Google Assistant while you're driving, and you just say, Google, take me to Chick-fil-A or something, and you may know how to get to Chick-fil-A yourself, but that Google Assistant is showing you a different route, and it could actually tell you on the app that this route actually has far less traffic than the route that maybe I was thinking about going to. So I guess in a sense, like, we have to, as we grow and AI becomes a much more normal and accepted part of our lives, we have to treat them as an assistant, as a partner to sort of help navigate certain situations. Yeah. In terms of figuring out what's ethical, have you had any situations that you've gotten, let's say, significant pushback when dealing with a client?
I wouldn't say significant pushback. I think part of, in some industries, there are regulations that prevents you from collecting certain information. That especially could be limiting when it comes to, for an organization trying to measure bias in the system. Mm. So when you're thinking about, well, I still want to evaluate my system. I don't have information, let's say, about gender or race, but I want to make sure my system is fair. So if I have, the individual's name, I might use some libraries or packages or services that are out there that could, process the names and give me inferred information on their gender or race. Mm. So setting aside some concerns that how good this inference would be for individuals, especially on the minority group, mm-hmm. There is also another side of it. If the individuals had the opportunity to provide that information and they didn't, is it okay to infer that information? Mm. Because technically, if they didn't want to share that, so you might have, an ethical obligation not to use it. But at the same time, you also have a good intention because you want to make sure the system is not biased against them. So how would you navigate that? So these are the type of sometimes challenging conversations that comes up that you may not have a really good answer to it. Do you want to exclude those people? Especially people who may have not provided that information, might be from the minorities who have concerns that if they provide that information, there might be bias towards them. Right. So how would you navigate that element of it? So these are sometimes the kind of challenging perspective of that you may not find a good answer to it, but you probably want to try and have those perspectives in the process.
This is reminding me so much of when I took philosophy in college. Like there's so much of that in this industry. It's so cool. One of the things that I also wanted to mention is that some of our students are data science students and have a large interest in data ethics, data for good, things of that nature. And some might be listening right now. So Um, I'm curious if you have any advice for maybe somebody just starting out in data science that is interested in the path of data ethics.
Um, so it's definitely, every time that you're thinking about a use case and what kind of data that use case might need, thinking about what are the ethical implications of that? What should I be proactively thinking about to make sure the system that I'm, with good intentions, I'm trying to build is going to behave as I intended it to do? What kind of data considerations should I have? How my data should look like? Who's going to this system is going to be applied to? Who's going to benefit from it? And based on that, thinking about sometimes even just a simple formulation of the problem. If it's not done right, it can end up creating bias, as we have an example of that in healthcare, actually. So as part of the process, really thinking about what I'm trying to solve. Who am I trying to solve this problem for? And do I have all the information that's kind of relevant to them, and also presents them in an appropriate way?
I love it. I love it. That's great advice. Yeah, we got a lot of students interested in data science, but want to make sure that they do it ethically, because I don't know. I feel like the people coming to Flatiron School now are kind of the generation that have been somewhat impacted by non ethical practices, and also like we've been sort of bombarded with all of these stories about like Walmart and Target and the holiday season as we're shooting this is right around the corner, and that is sort of the most dangerous time when people get hacked, people are getting the information stolen. So making sure that the obviously the data is coming from an ethical place, but hopefully that it's secure as well. That is, as we wrap up here, I really wanted to ask this question, which is the question we ask every single guest that comes on the show. And that is, what is a quote that you live by?
The quote that I would applied. I would say question everything. Never take anything for granted, and always ask questions.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Short and sweet. And it sort of embodies everything we've talked about thus far. It's to question everything.
Absolutely. We always need to ask questions about, the work that we're doing, anything that's coming our way, to make sure, and it's not necessarily to criticize anything, just to make sure that we have full information when we are making any decision.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Haniyeh. Thank you so much. This was a great episode. I personally learned a lot because this is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate you coming on and shedding some light. Also, thank you for watching. And please, if you're on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, share. If you're listening to on a podcast, on a streaming service, please share, add us to your playlist, all that good stuff. I'm Jelani. This is the Tech Perspective Podcast, and we'll see you next time.